Hey, hey.
All right, here we are. Here we are, folks. Ed Diaz here with Fatemah. We got Michael,
Hello,
our guest
hello.
for today, who's going to bewilder us with all of the latest in real estate law, what's going on. We had a little bit of a side conversation a second ago about some of the new laws that are coming, particularly for landlords. Let's let you take it away from there.
Sure, yeah. So I think the most important piece to touch on today is roughly 4 hours ago, Pacific Standard Time. It's around 1 p.m. now. They posted that Congress will be considering the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. Now, in that act, all rent and mortgage payments, that's not only federally backed loans, but all rent and mortgage payments would be suspended with no debt accrual. So what that means is rather than having rent put on, for example, if you have a one-year lease and you're unable to pay for 3 months under the standard basically stay in place orders, folks are able to negotiate independently and place the additional 3 months that they missed at the end or the back of the lease. Under this act, if it's passed, that requirement for payment would be removed and you would not pay. So it would be basically like a charge off. Now, simultaneously, the landlords as well would have no obligation to pay for the mortgage. So obviously you would work the numbers for the difference, and if any, that's being charged to the tenants from the landlord, but that would be forgiven as well. And this would cover leases from canceled payments. It also creates an optional landlord fund that fully finances the purchase of private rental properties. And the only stipulations there is that the landlords are not able to refuse rent, nor are they able to discriminate against the tenants based on income. And obviously the other discriminatory issues, sexual orientation, race, and so forth are still in play. And so there could be no discrimination there. But the stipulations under the act are no refusal of rent and not discriminating on the basis of income. So that really covers the gist of the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020, if passed, and they should be bringing this before the Congress fairly soon. That would be a great relief both on the landlord and the tenant side. And then I guess just another piece to note is that the government, under a different proposal by the Democrats, is proposing to provide Americans with a $2,000 monthly stimulus that as we understand it right now, also would not be a debt that's incurred. It would just be similar to a grant, if you will. So
I did see that. Yeah, can you go over really quickly that rule, because I don't know if there was a lag in Zoom to Facebook Live when it comes to the Mortgage and Rent Relief Act.
Sure. So just
go
go the proposal again.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Sure. So only hours ago, maybe about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours ago, Pacific Standard Time, and it's roughly 1:15 p.m. now, they posted that the Congress will soon be considering Representative Omar's proposal for the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. Within that act, all rent and mortgage, not only the federally backed mortgages, but all rent and mortgages would be suspended without a debt accrual, meaning that rather than, for example, if you are unable to pay 3 months worth of rent and you're in a 1-year lease, under current standards, you would negotiate independently with your landlord to place the 3 months on the back end of the lease. So what would have been the termination of the original 1-year lease, say in January, would then not expire until the 1st of April. But now, under the proposal, if passed, those 3 months would be extinguished for both the mortgage and for both the rent. So there would be no loss suffered on either party's behalf. And so it's really a fair way to come down the line and offer the relief that's really needed right now for Americans. Under that act, it covers all leases that would have their payments canceled, of course. But there's a landlord relief fund that will be included as well. And within that relief fund, monies will be allocated to the landlords in order to enable them to purchase additional private rental properties. So this is a pretty big boon for the real estate industry in order to help, inject it and keep it alive during these troubling times. Again, and the only stipulations under the act for landlords would be to not refuse rent, and then also within considering all of the normal discriminatory practices that are not allowed, such as race, religion, sexual orientation, and so forth. They have the added factor that landlords will not be able to discriminate based on income.
Based on income. Okay.
Correct.
Perfect. Sounds like the playing field is being leveled as we speak, hopefully.
Well, hopefully, if this passes, and hopefully the Republicans will not try to block it, because this really is sort of the fairest way to sort of shoot down the line in order to balance the risks and the losses. Because of course, we in the face of potential rent strike throughout the country, which could potentially cripple the real estate industry, and you would see if we didn't have checks and balances to safeguard the landlord's interests, then really the folks who keep the industry alive would be crippled, quite frankly.
And that's
Yeah,
what
I agree.
I mean. I was wondering about that too, because there was the talks of rent strikes, but I was wondering what protections would there be for landlords, and if they weren't gaining any rent, I was worried that that would just totally collapse the real estate market, just like you said.
And that's the concern, Fatemah. And I guess the reason that I like to tie in the additional proposal of the $2,000 monthly stimulus is that that's not mutually exclusive, meaning that if the Mortgage and Rent Cancellation Act of 2020 passes and they pass the $2,000 monthly stimulus, you would be able to receive both of those benefits. So not only would the COVID-related inability to pay rent be suspended for the period of time that's covered, also the mortgages would be suspended, and then on top of that, both the landlord and the tenant arguably would receive $2,000 a month as a stimulus. So coupled with that and the landlord relief program, or fund rather, that really gives an injection to the real estate industry here in California that I think is sorely needed right now.
Yeah, and I've said this before that there's a tendency to demonize landlords because some people think that it's a rich person's problem. They should just go deal with it themselves. What people don't realize is that a lot of landlords are people who worked their whole lives and have sacrificed to be able to buy investment property, and so we should not demonize them. If anything, these are the same people that have created rental properties and rental opportunities for people to rent. I mean, nobody put a gun to anybody's head to go and rent an apartment. So I think that that's really important. And the fact that this legislation is going to help both the renter and also the landlord, I think is fair.
Right. I agree.
For those who need it.
Right, I agree with you. And then I guess just to dovetail off of that is, I primarily work, I have had clients that were tenants, but my practice primarily focuses on landlords. And what I've found is, and I do have my share of landlords who do have quite a bit of wealth, and therefore maybe they're not in a position that this is, something that they're worried about per se. And I have one landlord that was able to waive rent for all of his tenants in a very, very fairly large property, right? Quite a number of units, about I think 80 units. So, but what I've found for the majority of my clients is they are homeowners that have their own mortgage in addition to the expenses that are on their rental properties. One of my clients in particular has a case that's being held up in the San Francisco courts, because as you guys know, the courts, other than felony arraignments and civil harassment, the courts are all but at a standstill. And so the eviction that we have in the San Francisco Superior Court has been held in abeyance. Settlement negotiations are fairly nil, because neither side really has leverage and no one can be evicted right now. So,
yeah,
but to the point is that this particular client has been covering not only her own mortgage, but also that of the tenants for quite some period, with no end in sight of when that will stop, right? Because even when the shelter in place orders are lifted, hopefully as scheduled for May 3rd and May 4th respectively in various counties, what we'll see then is probably a 90-day grace period before before unlawful detainer actions will be allowed to be even filed again. So those that are currently within the court, basically we have what we call a court clog right now. So but this particular client is not a wealthy individual, and landlords are people too, and quite
Landlords are people too.
quite
That's a good way of putting it.
personable, quite compassionate people, and this particular client has bent over backwards in order to try to make arrangements to allow for the tenant to remain in the domicile.
Yeah.
So I think that it's very important at this time that we find a balanced measured approach to meting out funding or excusing obligations to pay.
What rights do landlords have if people start to break, for example, their leases and evacuate and leave their units?
Well, I don't think that we're going to see abandoning of property necessarily as much as we're going to see people remaining with an inability to pay. In either situation, in your scenario, the same recourse that they've always had is what's available to them, right? They have a duty to mitigate their damages by covering, meaning that they need to find a new tenant as soon as possible, or at least show that they've taken actual steps to do so. Now, I can think of 10 good arguments immediately right now related to COVID as to why their ability to mitigate might be constrained in a number of ways, particularly under force majeure, meaning the act of God that is the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of frustration of purpose in any contract that you would seek to engage in right now, not to mention most people are not out shopping for homes or looking at apartments right now because of the shelter in place orders.
Yes.
So document very well if there is an abandonment of property. Obviously do the total on the profits and loss based on the property so that you're able to itemize and assert your damages, and try to cover to the best of your ability by placing ads on Craigslist and other real estate forums. And possibly, I would add at this time, it may be a good idea to contact your realtor and mortgage broker to speak with them about the possibility of selling the unit. I think that contrary to popular belief, there are a number of investors, particularly real estate investors, that find that that what looks like a down market is the time to invest. And while there might be a little bit of a loss on the initial or the ultimate sale, that may be the better route to go, as opposed to waiting for the renters that may not come in this environment.
That's a really good point. So speaking of that, are you seeing, well, actually, let me rephrase this. So what are the laws around being able, if I'm a person wanting to rent, can I go look at a rental unit? Can I go through the whole regular process besides wearing a mask and the 6-foot distancing?
Right. So no is the short answer. Nothing's regular anymore. And the alleged return to normal, or the hope for return to normal, even we won't see again the status quo that we had prior to COVID-19. So the return to normal will be a semblance of normal that looks like something similar to what we once had, but social distancing will still stay in play. Restaurants will measure out tables differently. Lines that we wait in will be differently. And similarly, leasing offices and real estate agents that show whether you're renting or buying. In the rental scenario, it's based right now in California, it's based on property by property, their policies. They do, all properties are required by law to comply with the shelter in place orders and to comply with the social distancing when outside. So we would say analogously as applied to the realtors now are only allowed to have 2 additional individuals within the showing place at one time. So I would also say that analogously that applies to leasing agents that would be showing properties, no more than 2 additional individuals, masks being used, and to the extent possible, keeping the 6 foot to 27-foot social distancing, because there have been reports that the droplets can even be transferred within 27. So definitely use a mask, call ahead. Most offices are not open. Most of my clients that have apartment units, their offices are not, they're in the office, but they don't open the door for walk-ins. So you would want to email, phone call, use all available routes of not in-person arrangements to make communication with them. Schedule your appointment and take as few people as possible for the viewing. Only of the essential parties that would be able to execute the contract and be able to make the decision on the unit that they do want the unit, and then execute the contract accordingly and make the deposit.
Got it. Are you seeing rent incentives to people who are seeking apartments right now on behalf of the landlords, or not really?
You know, that's not something I've explored. I've been more on probably on the real estate and sales side. And you certainly, as you're aware, you see a number of creative ways to structure deals now. There's a lot more mutually beneficial arrangements being made, because it behooves us all to cooperate now and put
collaborate.
Our heads together.
Absolutely.
Right. So this us against them mentality that we once saw, even as litigators now, I'm seeing a lot more of congenial and friendly interaction.
I like that.
I do too. I've always been a great fan of collaborative efforts and believing that attorneys should work jointly, even if they are positioned as adversaries. You can find common ground and work towards a mutually beneficial resolution for both parties, where everyone walks away feeling like they had some bit of the win. And so and I have not seen any rent incentives as of yet. And I think probably because that would promote mobility more than anything. And we are still in sort of a holding pattern where people that are trying to comply with the law are not really offering incentives that would
make sense,
inspire folks to move around more.
Right. That makes total sense. That's
actually
really good insight.
Thank you. And one other point, I think now I've had a virtual law office and I've had brick and mortar during the same time, but for the better part of 10 years, I've operated a virtual law office, which means that I conduct video conference consultations through an encrypted website. The document submissions are usually can be done on Dropbox, or it can be mailed. Obviously now we prefer Dropbox and scan rather than having other outside substances on top of the paperwork that would arrive. So the virtual interactions, similar to this one, with respect to showing homes, with respect to showing rental properties, is really where it's going to be at. And folks that, and I certainly look forward to improving my abilities as Fatemah records and as you put it out to Facebook Live. But the folks like yourselves who are technologically savvy are really going to be the forerunners of the day as things progress.
Yeah, thank you. That's absolutely something that we both noticed. Any questions for Fatemah or for him, Fatemah, please?
Well, no. Well, I'm thinking as far as you know how you mentioned that there's going to be some relief for landlords and tenants. Do you have an idea on what time frame that would be? Like what kind of?
Unfortunately,
a guess.
Right. Things are being rolled out, and I literally learned the law from studying. I received notices from various superior courts and federal courts, as well as the California Judicial Council, and as well as watching out for legislative proposals and bills with the particular $2,000 a month stimulus, as well as the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. They have not provided a timeline of when Congress will hear this, at least with the information that I reviewed this morning, hours before the call. And there's another piece for small businesses. I just wanted to add that there will be an additional stimulus package coming out, hopefully in the next I believe 7 to 10 business days. They're hoping to inject an additional fund for the SBA loans and
the PPP,
the idle loans that have been exhausted. Right. So some billion, 250 billion, I think, dollar million rather, excuse me, that was initially injected, I think was expired within a matter of 2 weeks, they said, 2 to 3 weeks, and or a week or two, I'm sorry, after the funds were released for applications online, and the funds were completely exhausted. So it's
Yeah,
my
they went
understanding
fast.
that within a matter of days to a week, that fund will be replenished. So that's another point for both tenants, if they're small business owners or they've been impacted by this disaster, and as well as landlords to stay abreast of.
Absolutely. Ed, I have a question for you. So I've been
Yeah.
getting some questions from my clients who have mortgages, and we have this mortgage relief, or maybe a lot of lenders are offering forbearance, and possibly saying that there's some lenders that are offering, like say if they're giving 3 to 6 months of forbearance, and they're saying that's going to be added to the end of the, just added towards the end of the term of their mortgage, but they're saying it's not going to affect their credit. So my question is, what happens during that time? Like say it's whether it's 3 to 6 months and it's not being paid, but they say it's not gonna, or they're not gonna report it late or anything. Is it shown as an X, or is it shown, because I mean the biggest thing is, I think Val had this back in the last bus where they said it's not
Yeah.
gonna affect your credit, but it shows unpaid. And then it really does affect your credit. So I think there's a lot of talk about taking up on these opportunities, but really people don't understand the
The
long-term
full
effect.
impact.
So can you kind of give us
Yeah.
some feedback on that?
Yeah. Now, because this whole forbearance wave has not happened yet, really in mass terms, we don't know how they're going to report it. However, I could tell you this is that the creditor is the one who reports. So the best thing to do is exercise due diligence, that ask those questions and get it in writing from your lender, that if they're going to give you and issue you a forbearance, that they are not going to show either late, and that they're going to just report as if they were just making payments, because the reality is they're getting paid, but it's just on the back end, right? It's being added to the back end. And make sure that, by the way, that you do ask for the lender to put it on the back end. Don't assume that just because you're getting a forbearance that it's getting put on the back end, because month number 4, you might have to pay 4 complete months right then and there, which kind of defeats the purpose. Because if you can't pay now, chances are you're not going to be able to pay all 4 months in 4 months. If that makes any sense.
Right. But so my biggest thing is too, okay, so say it does add on to the end, right? So but you don't necessarily pay, you're not paying within like 3 to 6 months. If a lender sees some type of space of payment, it doesn't show that it's been paid, but it's not reported late. Does that give them issues of being able to buy down the road or refinance or have any loans?
No, it should not. No, not at all. And what's going to happen is that we're going to call, we meaning of course the bank is going to call to find out. We're going to get a rating on that, and it'll show that they were in forbearance. We can't discriminate against that, as long as it was put in the back end and the person had a whole history prior to of paying on time. It'll be fine. Now, the bigger question is, how
Sure.
is that going to report as far as credit scores? How is the FICO, or the Fair Isaac and Company algorithm, going to treat that when it comes to scoring? That remains to be seen.
See, and I think a lot of these things, and what it is a lot of people are calling their banks. They're talking to representatives that a lot of them have no idea. Maybe they're not even homeowners, or they really understand the
Yeah.
bigger impact, and that's really concerning. So they're saying, hey, call your bank and ask for these programs, but you really don't know how that's going to impact you down the road. So people who can actually afford their payment, but maybe thought maybe I'll just get save some money and get these work on the forbearance, but I just don't want it to hurt them if they're not asking the right question.
Yeah, and here's where Michael comes into play. Michael, I mean, don't you think that if there was a wave of lenders that it was going to hurt the consumer's credit, that would start class action lawsuits in a pretty big way, because it kind of defeats the whole purpose of helping someone if you're going to hurt them. Because let's be honest, credit is finance, and if
Yeah,
you have
here,
bad credit, it's going to affect your your
right.
financial situation. So that would kind of defeat the purpose. You tell me, as an attorney, Michael, how would that pan out if, let's just say they did, right? And somebody comes and discriminates you, meaning that somebody, meaning another lender, discriminates you because you got a forbearance. I mean, what are the legalities around that?
Here's the problem. If the law, it's not good news, unfortunately. If the law does not allow for particular protections, prophylactics against the discriminatory or predatory practices, or with respect, if they don't allocate with provisions that talk about and cover the negative implications that are on the three different major tax or financial credit bureaus, there isn't that protection. And so obviously any of the normal discriminatory practices where there are laws in place to protect against that, you would be able to avail yourself of that. But if the laws that allow for this sort of back end dealing don't speak specifically to what the remedy is, if they choose to decline your request to not show it as negative history, unfortunately, you really won't have a leg to stand on in court when and if that day comes. So your counsel and advice initially was exactly what I would have said. Negotiate the friendliest terms that you're able to right now. Make sure you get it in writing. And I would even add to that you mutually execute that writing. So not just something that you memorialize the conversation, as I do oftentimes in my practice. Fatemah will make arrangements with me and I send an email to her saying, this is what we discussed on our call. If I have misunderstood anything, please clarify and correct me. And this is to memorialize the call. Now, I would say to go one step beyond, especially with creditors and lenders, negotiate the terms, recap that conversation, and then create a simple document, even if you just print out the memorialization of the conversation and add 2 signature blocks, sign your name, and have that representative sign their name as well. It's really important now. In a class that I just took on COVID-19, they really stressed it was regarding business disruption, insurance, and contract claims. And remember, under real estate law and landlord tenant, these are still just contracts. So every time you see COVID-19, business disruption, and contracts, we need to have our bell ring to understand that's in our house, that's real estate, that's landlord tenant, right? And I can't emphasize enough right now, as they did in the course, that documenting even when you don't have a problem right now. So what is your current status? What are your current holdings? What are the potential implications? Just really brainstorming and getting it down on paper so that you're able to look at the topography or the lay of the land, if you will, and that you do have documentation based on where you were prior to COVID, how it's impacted you now, particularly financially and with respect to your property, and then the different types of mitigation steps that you've taken in order to try to curb the damage that has happened, right? And so if and when we have to go to court, you've already compiled that documentation, and you're able to also hopefully prevent court intervention by providing that to the various lenders and folks who you're dealing with, so that they can see this isn't just a whimsical notion that you thought of or in response to the latest bill that was passed. This is something that you've documented since, from the time of
Exception.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
and on that note, you guys, I'd love everyone to check. I have to go now to my next appointment.
So how do people get a hold of you, Michael?
Right. So as it stands, you may call me directly at area code 213. I am in the Bay Area. It's just a phone I've had for 10 years, over 20 years now. So 213-709-6241. Again, 213-709-6241. You may email me at huff@hufflegal.com. That's HUF like Frank, F like Frank, @hufflegal.com. And also be sure to check us out on the website, www.hufflegal.com. I really thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
You're always such a wealth of information. Fatemah, how do people get a hold of you?
My cell is 415-756-4418. You can call or text. And how about you, Ed?
Call me, cell phone, or text me, 415-368-1149. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. If you have any additional questions, reach out to us. Take care. Have a great day. Stay inside and stay healthy.